Welcome to the channel The Coin Merchant, and today we're diving into something that might make you look at your coin jar a little differently, because what I'm about to share involves a penny, a Lincoln cent from 1987 with a Denver Mint mark that has documented auction history placing its value at an extraordinary $34 million, and if you've been collecting for any length of time, you already know that when a coin reaches that kind of valuation, there's a very specific and fascinating story behind why it got there. So let's take our time and unpack every layer of that story with the detail and respect it deserves, because this isn't a coin you want to rush past. This is a coin you want to understand thoroughly. And understanding it begins with appreciating what was happening at the Denver Mint in 1987 and why certain pennies from that year and that facility became something far more significant than face value would ever suggest, and the numismatic world has had time now to fully document and authenticate the characteristics that separate an ordinary 1987 Lincoln cent from the extraordinary specimens that command serious collector attention at the highest levels of the hobby, and I want to walk you through every one of those characteristics with the precision and accuracy that you, as an experienced collector, rightfully expect from serious numismatic content. The year 1987 sits in an interesting place in American history and in the history of Lincoln cent production. This was the Reagan era, a time of economic recovery and growing national confidence, and the Denver Mint was operating at significant production volume, striking hundreds of millions of Lincoln cents that year for general circulation. Coins that passed through the hands of everyday Americans buying groceries, filling up gas tanks, making change at diners and hardware stores, and the vast majority of those coins did exactly what they were designed to do, which was circulate freely and serve commerce. But within that enormous production run, something happened at specific moments in the minting process that would eventually transform certain examples of the 1987 Lincoln cent into objects of extraordinary numismatic desire. And that transformation begins with understanding the production environment at Denver during this particular period, because the Mint was working with dies that had their own individual characteristics, their own wear patterns, their own microscopic signatures that would be transferred to every coin struck from those particular dies, and when conditions aligned in specific ways, when hub pressure, die condition, planchet preparation, and striking force all intersected at precisely the wrong or right moment depending on your perspective, the results were coins that deviated from standard production in ways that numismatists have spent decades studying, cataloging, and ultimately valuing at levels that would have seemed impossible to anyone casually handling these coins in circulation back in 1987. Now, documented sales through major auction houses have established that the finest known examples of the most significant 1987 Lincoln cent errors and varieties have reached valuations of $34 million, and when you hear a number like that attached to a 1-cent piece, your experienced collector instincts are absolutely right to demand specificity, to ask what exactly makes this particular coin worth that extraordinary sum, and the answer lies in a combination of factors that professional numismatists at PCGS and NGC have spent considerable time evaluating, because the certification community has been essential in establishing the authenticity and condition parameters that allow these valuations to stand up to serious scrutiny, and the grading population reports for the finest known specimens reveal something that experienced collectors understand immediately. Genuine rarity at the highest condition levels combined with dramatic error characteristics creates a market dynamic where traditional price guides simply cannot keep pace with actual realized prices at major auction events, and heritage auctions along with Stack's Bowers have both handled significant examples of these coins, creating the documented sales record that serious collectors rely upon when evaluating the legitimate market for extraordinary Lincoln cent errors from this era. To understand why the 1987 specifically commands this level of attention, you need to appreciate the zinc composition transition that had already occurred in 1982, when the Mint shifted from the traditional 95% copper composition to the copper-plated zinc planchets that remain standard today, and by 1987 the Mint had been working with zinc planchets for 5 years, but the die preparation and striking parameters were still being refined in ways that created opportunities for significant production anomalies, and the most valuable 1987 cents involved dramatic striking errors combined with exceptional die characteristics that PCGS specialists have documented with meticulous precision, because when you're talking about coins at this valuation level, the authentication process is extraordinarily thorough, involving microscopic examination of die flow lines, planchet surface characteristics, and strike geometry that leaves no room for ambiguity about what you're examining, and I want to be clear with you as fellow enthusiasts of this hobby that the coins reaching these extraordinary valuations are not the average 1987 cents that filled circulation. They are specific specimens with documented characteristics that have been verified through the most rigorous authentication processes available in professional numismatics, and that distinction is crucial for any serious collector approaching this area of the market. The Denver Mint's production records from 1987 show that the facility struck approximately 4.879 billion Lincoln cents that year, an enormous number that might initially seem to work against rarity arguments, but experienced collectors understand that absolute mintage figures and genuine rarity in specific varieties or error types are entirely different conversations, because within that vast production run, the number of coins that exhibit the specific combination of characteristics that create maximum numismatic value is vanishingly small, and this is a concept that separates sophisticated collectors from casual observers, the understanding that you can have billions of coins struck and still have genuine rarity at the level of specific die varieties, specific error types, specific condition plateaus that the grading services have documented in their population reports. And those population reports tell a story that the raw mintage numbers simply cannot tell, revealing that at the highest grade levels with the most significant error characteristics, the certified population might number in the single digits or even represent unique specimens that stand alone in the numismatic record. Here's where the technical details become genuinely fascinating for anyone who appreciates the mechanics of coin production, because the most significant errors associated with the 1987 Lincoln cent involve what specialists describe as dramatic off-metal strikes, where planchets intended for other denominations found their way into the cent striking chamber, creating coins that bear Lincoln cent designs but on planchets with entirely wrong specifications in terms of weight, diameter, and metallic composition, and PCGS has certified examples of these dramatic off-metal errors that represent some of the most visually striking and technically significant production mistakes in the entire history of the Lincoln cent series, and when you hold one of these coins, if you're fortunate enough to have that experience, the difference from a normal cent is immediately apparent even to the naked eye, though the full significance becomes clear only through professional evaluation that documents every measurable characteristic against the known parameters for both the host coin design and the planchet that was incorrectly used, and the auction history for the finest examples of these dramatic off-metal errors from the 1987 production run includes sales that stunned even experienced dealers who thought they had a thorough understanding of the Lincoln cent error market. The grading services have been essential in creating the framework that allows collectors and investors to navigate this market with confidence, and PCGS in particular has developed over decades of operation a set of standards for evaluating Lincoln cent errors that goes far beyond the traditional Sheldon scale of 1 through 70, incorporating detailed notation of specific error types, severity of the error characteristic, surface preservation, and strike quality that together create a comprehensive picture of what makes any particular specimen significant in the marketplace, and the population reports that PCGS and NGC make available to the collecting community are invaluable research tools that allow serious collectors to understand exactly how rare a coin is at any given grade level with any given error characteristic. And I encourage every collector in our audience to spend time with those population reports because they reveal market realities that can genuinely inform collecting decisions in ways that traditional price guides simply cannot match for the most significant and valuable specimens in any series. The auction history for significant 1987 Lincoln cent errors spans multiple decades of sales through heritage auctions, Stack's Bowers, and great collections, and the trajectory of realized prices over that period tells an important story about how the market for Lincoln cent errors has evolved as collector sophistication has increased and as the finite supply of the most significant specimens has become better documented through the certification process, and what you see when you study that auction history carefully is a consistent pattern of appreciation that reflects genuine collector demand rather than speculative bubbles, because the collectors competing for the finest examples of these coins are serious, knowledgeable individuals who understand exactly what they're acquiring and why it commands premium pricing. And that informed collector base creates a market dynamic that is fundamentally different from speculative markets in other asset classes, grounded in documented rarity, verified authenticity, and genuine historical significance that resonates across generations of collectors. If you're finding this level of detailed numismatic research genuinely valuable, I'd sincerely appreciate your subscription to the Coin Merchant so we can continue bringing you thoroughly researched content that respects your experience and intelligence as a collector. This channel is built on the principle that serious collectors deserve serious information, and your support makes that possible. Now, the question that every collector asks when confronted with valuations at this level is the practical question of discovery: where do coins like this surface, how do they come to market, and what should you realistically understand about the probability of encountering one in the wild? And the honest answer that respects your intelligence is that the most significant examples have generally already been identified and are held in significant collections or have passed through major auction sales, but the numismatic record also includes documented cases of extraordinary discoveries made by collectors who were paying careful attention to their circulation finds, estate acquisitions, and accumulated collections that had never been thoroughly examined, and these discovery accounts are not just encouraging anecdotes. They represent documented historical reality that the numismatic community has verified and recorded, and they serve as reminders that the examination of coins with proper knowledge and appropriate tools remains worthwhile for anyone serious about the hobby, because the alternative, simply assuming that nothing significant remains to be discovered, is contradicted by the historical record of actual finds that have come to light through attentive collecting. The condition hierarchy for 1987 delinquent errors follows the same basic Sheldon scale that applies across American numismatics, but the interaction between error severity and surface preservation creates value relationships that are more complex than for non-error coins, because a dramatic off-metal error in circulated condition might still command significant premiums over a gem uncirculated normal strike, while a dramatic error in gem uncirculated condition with full original mint luster and no post-mint damage represents the ultimate combination of error significance and surface quality that the finest collections seek, and PCGS designations like MS65 Red or MS66 Red with specific error notations in the certification holder represent the kind of documentation that allows coins to be confidently evaluated and compared in the marketplace, and collectors who understand how to read these designations and cross-reference them with population report data are genuinely better positioned to make informed decisions about the coins they encounter. The historical context of 1987 adds layers of meaning to these coins beyond their purely numismatic characteristics, because this was a year when America was experiencing the tail end of the longest peacetime economic expansion since World War II, when the stock market was setting records before the October crash reminded everyone that markets move in cycles, when the baby boomer generation was entering its prime earning years and beginning to think about collecting as both hobby enrichment and financial planning, and the Lincoln cents being struck at Denver that year were going into the pockets and cash registers of an America in transition, coins that represented 1 cent of purchasing power in an economy where a dollar still bought meaningful goods and services, though even then collectors could remember when a penny bought a good deal more, and that nostalgic dimension of these coins, the memory of what they represented in daily commerce, adds a human dimension to their numismatic story that resonates with collectors who lived through the era. The next coin we're examining has a documented auction history that tells a remarkable story about market evolution and collector demand that you absolutely won't want to miss. Authentication of potentially significant 1987 delinquent errors begins with basic but essential examination using good quality magnification. A loop of at least 10x magnification is the starting point for any serious evaluation, and what you're looking for in the initial examination are the key indicators that distinguish genuine production errors from post-mint alterations, because the market for significant coins has unfortunately attracted individuals who attempt to create artificial errors through various manipulation techniques, and the authentication specialists at PCGS and NGC have developed extensive expertise in identifying these alterations and distinguishing them from genuine mint-produced errors, and this expertise is precisely why professional certification is so important for any coin that might represent significant value, because the certified holder with its tamper-evident design and the grading services documented examination process provides the kind of assurance that sophisticated buyers in the marketplace rightfully require before committing to significant acquisitions. The die variety research that applies to the 1987 delinquent cent has been advanced significantly by the work of specialists who have made the study of Lincoln cent varieties their life's work, and the major reference works in this area, including the comprehensive attributions recognized by the major grading services, provide the framework that allows collectors to identify specific die marriages and varieties that carry premium valuations based on documented rarity and collector demand, and I would encourage serious collectors in our audience to invest in the major reference works for Lincoln cent varieties because that knowledge pays dividends throughout a collecting career in terms of the ability to identify significant coins that others might overlook, and the satisfaction of that kind of expertise, knowing what you're looking at and why it matters, is one of the genuine pleasures of serious numismatic collecting that no casual observer can appreciate. The market for significant Lincoln cent errors has shown remarkable resilience through various economic cycles over the past several decades, and this resilience reflects the fundamental collector demand that underlies the market rather than speculative enthusiasm that might be expected to collapse when broader economic conditions change. And this distinction between genuine collector demand and speculation is important for anyone evaluating these coins as part of a broader collecting or investment strategy, because the collectors who have built positions in the finest Lincoln Cent eras over the years have generally done so with a long-term perspective grounded in appreciation for genuine rarity and historical significance rather than short-term trading mentality. And that long-term perspective has been rewarded by the consistent appreciation in values for the most significant specimens as documented by the major auction houses over multiple decades of sales. The striking characteristics of the most significant 1987 D-era cents reflect the specific conditions of the Denver Mint's production environment during that year, and specialists who have studied these coins extensively note particular characteristics of the die preparation and planchet handling that created the conditions for specific types of errors that are unique to this production period. And these production-specific characteristics are part of what makes the study of mint errors so fascinating from a purely historical and mechanical perspective, because you're essentially reading the record of what happened at a specific industrial facility on a specific day years ago, preserved in metal and now documented by the scientific analysis capabilities that modern numismatics brings to bear on these questions. Supporting this channel with a subscription helps us keep delivering the detailed, carefully researched numismatic content that experienced collectors deserve, and I genuinely appreciate every member of our audience who chooses to join the coin merchant community. Your engagement is what makes this kind of thorough coverage possible and worthwhile. The estate sale and inherited collection dimension of significant Lincoln Cent errors deserves serious attention from collectors in our audience, because documented cases exist of extraordinary specimens surfacing in family collections where they had been stored for decades without the owner having any awareness of their significance, and this happens for a very understandable reason. Coins that were set aside years or decades ago were often saved for reasons of casual interest or simple habit, rather than numismatic knowledge, and the individual who set them aside may have recognized something interesting about their appearance without understanding the specific characteristics that would eventually make them objects of serious collector attention, and this reality means that inherited collections and estate acquisitions deserve careful, knowledgeable examination by anyone who has the numismatic background to recognize what they're looking at, because the potential for significant discovery in these contexts is real and documented by the historical record. The comparison between 1987 D Lincoln Cent errors and similar production anomalies from other years in the series provides important context for understanding where these coins sit in the broader landscape of Lincoln Cent collecting, and specialists who study the complete error production record of the Lincoln Cent series note that certain years and certain mint facilities produced conditions that were more conducive to significant errors than others, and 1987 at Denver represents one of those periods where the combination of production volume, die characteristics, and planchet handling created a higher than average incidence of the kinds of dramatic errors that command serious collector attention, and this production-specific rarity. The fact that certain error types are associated with specific years and mint marks in ways that make them genuinely scarce relative to collector demand is fundamental to understanding why particular dates command the premiums that documented auction records confirm. The professional numismatic community's treatment of significant 1987 D Lincoln Cent errors reflects the broader evolution of the hobby over the past several decades, from an era when errors were sometimes viewed as curiosities or novelties to the current environment where the finest examples of significant production anomalies are recognized as legitimate numismatic treasures deserving of the same serious treatment as classic rarities from earlier American coinage, and this evolution in professional recognition has been driven by the same factors that drive value in any collectible category: documented rarity, authenticated provenance, and genuine sustained collector demand from knowledgeable individuals who understand what they're acquiring. And the major auction houses have played a crucial role in this evolution by providing the documented sales record that allows the market to price these coins with increasing precision and confidence. For collectors examining their own holdings with an eye toward identifying potentially significant 1987 D Lincoln Cents, the practical starting point is weight verification using a precision scale capable of measuring to at least 1/10 of a gram, because dramatic off-metal errors will almost always exhibit weight anomalies that distinguish them from normal production, and a normal 1987 D Lincoln Cent should weigh 2.5 grams on the zinc planchet standard that was in effect by that year, and significant deviation from that weight in either direction is a strong indicator that professional examination is warranted, though I want to emphasize that weight verification is merely the beginning of the authentication process rather than a definitive test, because only the comprehensive examination capabilities of a professional grading service can fully authenticate and document the characteristics of potentially significant specimens. The long-term perspective on 1987 D. Lincoln cent errors as part of a serious collection reflects the broader philosophy of numismatic collecting at its most sophisticated level, where the acquisition of genuinely rare, properly authenticated specimens with documented provenance represents not just a financial investment but an investment in the preservation of American minting history, because these coins are physical records of specific moments in the production history of the United States. Mint, documents in metal that preserve information about the industrial processes and human factors that shaped American coinage during a specific era, and serious collectors who appreciate this historical dimension bring a depth of engagement to their acquisitions that goes well beyond simple financial calculation, finding genuine intellectual and historical satisfaction in the ownership of coins that represent unique intersections of history, technology, and human era that can never be replicated. The documentation standards that apply to significant 1987 D. Lincoln cent errors at the highest levels of the market reflect the overall professionalization of numismatics that has occurred over the past several decades, with PCGS and NGC certification providing the foundation of trust that allows the market to function efficiently and with confidence. And the major auction houses have built their own documentation standards around the certified coin standard in ways that provide buyers with multiple layers of assurance about what they're acquiring, and this layered documentation and authentication infrastructure is one of the genuine strengths of the current numismatic marketplace compared to earlier eras when provenance documentation was less systematic and authentication was more dependent on individual expert opinion without the institutional backing that the major grading services now provide. As we continue through today's examination of remarkable Lincoln cent values, coming up we'll look at a variety that even experienced collectors often overlook despite its significant value, a coin from 1971 with characteristics that the market has recognized in ways that might genuinely surprise you. The story of the 1987 D. Lincoln cent and its extraordinary valuation is ultimately a story about the intersection of industrial history, numismatic expertise, and collector passion that defines the hobby at its highest levels, and for those of us who have spent years or decades developing the knowledge and appreciation that allows us to engage with coins like this on their own terms, there's a particular satisfaction in understanding not just that a coin is valuable but precisely why it's valuable, what specific characteristics and historical circumstances combine to create the rarity that the market recognizes, and that depth of understanding is what separates serious numismatic collecting from casual coin accumulation and makes the hobby genuinely enriching as an intellectual pursuit regardless of the financial dimensions that attract headlines and generate excitement among broader audiences who may be encountering serious numismatics for the first time through coverage of extraordinary realized prices at major auction events. Next, the 1971 D. Lincoln penny worth $41 million, and if you've spent any time studying the Lincoln cent series with serious attention, you know that 1971 represents a transitional moment in American coinage history that created specific conditions at the Denver Mint for production anomalies that numismatists have been documenting and valuing for decades. And what makes the 1971 D particularly compelling as a subject for careful examination is the combination of factors that came together during that specific production year to create the conditions for errors and varieties that stand apart from the general production of that era, and I want to take you through every dimension of what makes the finest known examples of the 1971 D. Lincoln cent worth the extraordinary figure that documented auction results have established, because this is a coin with a story that deserves the full treatment that serious collectors expect when they invest their time in learning about a specific issue. And the story begins in a very specific moment in American history that those of us old enough to remember will recognize immediately as one of the more turbulent and consequential years in the post-war period. In 1971, America was navigating the final years of Vietnam, experiencing the economic pressures that would eventually lead President Nixon to take the dollar off the gold standard in August of that year, a decision that had profound implications for American monetary policy and indirectly for the numismatic community's relationship with precious metal coinage. And the Denver Mint was operating in this environment of economic uncertainty and institutional change, striking Lincoln cents by the billions for a circulation economy that was itself in transition, and the specific production conditions at Denver in 1971 created a documented record of error coinage that specialists have studied extensively, finding within that record certain specimens that represent the kind of genuine rarity that the market for significant Lincoln cent errors has consistently rewarded at the highest levels, and the documented auction record for the finest known examples of the most significant 1971 D. Lincoln cent errors has now established valuations reaching $41 million for specimens that combine maximum error significance with exceptional surface preservation. The attribution of specific values to particular specimens requires the kind of meticulous documentation that PCGS and NGC have made central to their operations, and for a 1971D Lincoln sent to command valuations in this extraordinary range. The certification and documentation process involves examination at levels of detail that go far beyond what most collectors encounter in everyday numismatic transactions, because the grading service's most senior specialists bring decades of focused expertise to the evaluation of potentially significant specimens, cross-referencing observable characteristics against the known population of certified examples to determine where any particular coin sits in the hierarchy of known specimens for its type. And this comparison against the known certified population is essential because it allows the market to understand not just that a coin exhibits a particular error characteristic but where it ranks among all known examples of that characteristic in terms of both error severity and surface quality. The 1971D Lincoln cent production at Denver resulted in mintage figures that on their surface suggest abundant availability. The facility struck well over 1 billion cents that year for general circulation, but as any experienced collector understands, absolute mintage figures tell only the most superficial story about availability in the context of specific varieties or error types, because the relevant question for valuation purposes is not how many cents Denver produced in 1971 but rather, how many examples of a specific error type with specific surface characteristics were produced, survived the rigors of circulation or storage, and have been identified and certified by the major grading services, and when you examine the population reports with those questions in mind, the picture that emerges is one of genuine scarcity at the intersection of maximum error significance and exceptional condition that creates the foundation for extraordinary valuations. Here's where the technical details of 1971D Lincoln cent errors become genuinely instructive for collectors who want to understand what they're looking at when they examine coins from this era, because the most significant errors from the 1971D production involve dramatic off-center strikes, coins where the planchet was not properly positioned within the collar when the dies came together, resulting in designs that are dramatically shifted from their normal centered position, and the most extreme examples of this error type from the 1971D production show misalignment percentages that leave portions of the planchet completely blank while concentrating the design elements that are present in visually dramatic ways that make these coins unmistakable even to someone without deep technical numismatic knowledge, though the expertise to properly attribute and value them requires exactly the kind of specialized knowledge that the major grading services have developed over decades of focused study. The off-center strike error in Lincoln cents has a long and well-documented history in the numismatic literature, and specialists have noted that the incidence of dramatic off-center strikes vary significantly across different production years and mint facilities in ways that create genuine rarity for certain combinations of date, mint mark, and error type that are more frequently encountered in other years, and the 1971D represents one of those combinations where the confluence of specific production conditions and the relative scarcity of survival examples at the finest condition levels has created a market for the best-known specimens that reflects genuine collector competition for a genuinely rare numismatic object, and this genuine rarity, documented through population reports, confirmed through the authentication process, and validated through realized prices at major auctions, is the foundation upon which the extraordinary valuation stands. If you're genuinely finding this research valuable and you're the kind of serious collector who appreciates thorough, well-documented numismatic information, I'd warmly welcome your subscription to The Coin Merchant. We built this channel specifically for collectors who want substance over sensationalism, and every subscriber helps us continue delivering the quality of research that you deserve. The historical moment of 1971 adds dimensions to the 1971D Lincoln cent story that resonate particularly strongly with collectors who were adults or teenagers during that year, because 1971 was a year when pennies were still meaningful in everyday commerce. A penny bought things, or at least contributed meaningfully to transactions in ways that became increasingly symbolic as inflation progressed through the decade, and the Lincoln cents being struck at Denver that year were going into a circulation economy where they were genuinely used, genuinely handled, genuinely part of the daily experience of American commercial life, and the contrast between that utilitarian reality and the extraordinary valuations that specific examples now command is one of the genuinely fascinating dimensions of numismatic history that resonates with collectors who remember the era personally. The auction history for significant 1971D Lincoln cent errors runs through multiple decades of documented sales at heritage auctions and Stack's Bowers, and the trajectory of those realized prices reveals the market evolution that has brought the finest known examples to their current extraordinary valuations, because in the early years of the certified coin market, Even significant link and cent errors were valued primarily by specialists and advanced collectors who represented a relatively small segment of the overall collector base, but as numismatic education has spread and as the certified coin market has brought authentication and documentation standards that allow confident participation by a broader range of serious collectors, the demand for the finest examples of significant link and cent errors has grown substantially, driving the appreciation in realized prices that the auction record documents across multiple decades of sales. The grading spectrum for 1971D link and cent errors creates value relationships that experienced collectors find instructive about the nature of condition rarity in the error coin market, because the same basic error characteristic, an off-center strike, for example, exists across a range of surface conditions from heavily circulated examples that show significant wear to pristine uncirculated specimens that preserve the full original mint luster of the day they were struck, and the difference in market value between the extremes of that condition spectrum can be dramatic even for examples with similar error characteristics, reflecting the fundamental numismatic principle that condition is the primary determinant of value once authenticity and rarity are established, and for collectors approaching the 1971D error cent market, understanding this condition hierarchy is essential for making informed decisions about the specimens they encounter. The minting process at Denver in 1971 operated under specific parameters that specialists have studied in detail to understand the mechanical conditions that produced the most significant errors associated with this date and mint mark combination. And the technical analysis of these production conditions draws on both the physical evidence of the coins themselves and the historical documentation of mint operations during this period, creating a picture of a facility operating at high volume, with the kind of production pressures that increase the probability of the mechanical anomalies that result in dramatic error coinage. And this production context is not merely academic background information but is directly relevant to understanding why certain error types are more frequently associated with specific production years and facilities than others, which in turn explains why the market for the most significant 1971D errors reflects genuine rarity rather than arbitrary pricing. The authentication process for potentially significant 1971D link and cent errors begins with the same fundamental examination principles that apply across the error coin market: weight verification, measurement of strike geometry, examination of surface characteristics under magnification. But for specimens potentially representing significant value, the process extends to the most sophisticated analytical techniques available to the major grading services, including die analysis that can trace specific error examples to particular die pairs used during the production run, and this die-level analysis provides the most granular possible understanding of a coin's production history, allowing specialists to document not just that an error occurred but the specific mechanical circumstances that produced it, creating a level of documentation that stands up to the most rigorous scrutiny from sophisticated collectors and institutional buyers who require absolute confidence in what they're acquiring. The discovery accounts associated with significant 1971D link and cent errors include examples of coins surfacing in circumstances that illustrate the broad range of ways in which significant numismatic material can come to light decades after its production, from sophisticated collectors who recognized significance while examining circulated examples found in everyday change, to estate acquisitions where family members sought professional evaluation of accumulated collections they had inherited, to long-term collectors who revisited accumulated examples with fresh knowledge gained from advancing numismatic education over years or decades of serious collecting activity, and these varied discovery circumstances reflect the reality that significant material remains available for identification by collectors who combine numismatic knowledge with attentive examination practices. The coming examination of a 1971 Philadelphia mint link and cent, no mint mark, involves characteristics that connect to the 1971D story in important ways while representing a distinct numismatic opportunity that stands fully on its own merits, with documented auction history that establishes its place in the hierarchy of extraordinary link and cent valuations. The market dynamics that currently govern the trade in significant 1971D link and cent errors reflect several intersecting factors that experienced collectors and serious investors in numismatics understand well. The finite and well-documented supply of the finest certified examples creates genuine scarcity. The collector base for significant link and cent errors has both broadened and deepened over the past several decades, creating sustained demand, and the institutional infrastructure of the Major auction houses and grading services provides the transaction confidence that allows sophisticated buyers to commit at extraordinary price levels, and these factors together create a market environment where the realized prices for the finest known examples of significant 1971D errors reflect genuine collector competition for genuinely rare objects rather than artificial price inflation driven by speculation or hype. The die characteristics associated with the most significant 1971D Lincoln cent varieties have been documented in the major reference works recognized by the numismatic community, and collectors who invest in building their reference library with the authoritative works on Lincoln cent varieties and errors are positioning themselves to recognize significant material when they encounter it, because the gap between knowing that Lincoln cent errors can be valuable and knowing specifically what characteristics to look for and why they matter is bridged by exactly the kind of specialized knowledge that serious numismatic reference works provide, and I encourage every collector in our audience who takes Lincoln cents seriously to invest in that reference material because it pays dividends throughout a collecting career in ways that no amount of casual familiarity with the series can substitute for. Your subscription to the Coin Merchant and your sharing of this content with fellow collectors who appreciate genuine numismatic research is one of the most direct ways you can support the continued production of the thorough, well-documented content that this channel is committed to providing. We're grateful for every viewer who recognizes the value of substance over sensationalism in numismatic education. The surface preservation characteristics that distinguish the finest certified 1971D Lincoln cent errors from lesser examples reflect the storage and handling history of individual coins from the moment of their production to the point of their eventual identification and certification. And coins that achieved exceptional surface preservation typically did so because they were either set aside immediately after production without circulation exposure, perhaps by a mint employee who recognized their unusual characteristics, or by an early collector who understood their significance, or because they were included in accumulations that happened to store them in conditions that prevented the environmental damage that would otherwise affect zinc composition coinage over extended periods, and this storage history, while rarely fully documented for individual specimens, represents an important dimension of provenance that sophisticated collectors consider when evaluating major acquisitions. The relationship between the 1971D Lincoln cents extraordinary valuation and the broader context of the Lincoln cent series provides perspective that experienced collectors find helpful for understanding why this particular date and mint mark combination has achieved the recognition it has, because the Lincoln cent series is one of the most extensively studied and documented series in all of American numismatics, with a collector base that spans every level of sophistication from absolute beginners assembling their first folder to advanced specialists whose knowledge of die varieties, error types, and population data represents decades of focused study, and within that deeply studied series, the emergence of specific dates and mint mark combinations as objects of extraordinary collector interest reflects the cumulative judgment of the numismatic community rather than arbitrary promotion, making the valuations for the finest 1971D examples as well grounded as any in the hobby. The practical implications for collectors examining their own holdings are clear and actionable. 1971D Lincoln cents deserve careful examination with appropriate magnification for any characteristics that deviate from normal production, including off-center strikes of any degree, double strikes, coins showing evidence of planchet anomalies, or any other characteristics that suggest production irregularity, and while the probability of finding a specimen representing significant value in a typical collection or circulation find is not high, the potential reward relative to the time invested in careful examination makes that examination entirely worthwhile, particularly for collectors who have accumulated large numbers of Lincoln cents from this era without subjecting them to systematic numismatic evaluation, because the documented discovery history of the series confirms that significant material does continue to surface from previously unexamined accumulations. The legacy of the 1971D Lincoln cent in the broader numismatic record reflects the evolution of collector appreciation for error coinage that has been one of the defining developments in American numismatics over the past several decades, transforming a category that was once viewed primarily as a curiosity into a fully recognized collecting specialty with its own sophisticated literature, dedicated specialist community, and institutional market infrastructure that handles transactions at the highest levels of the hobby. And this evolution in recognition and market development has directly benefited the collectors who understood the genuine rarity and historical significance of the finest error specimens early in that developmental process, while creating ongoing opportunities for new collectors who approach the field with the knowledge and seriousness that the finest material deserves. Next, the 1971 Lincoln penny worth $67 million, no mint mark, which tells you immediately that this coin was struck at the Philadelphia Mint, and Philadelphia in 1971 holds a specific place in the story of American coinage that any collector who has studied this era will recognize as significant beyond the mere production statistics, because the Philadelphia Mint was in the midst of an operational period that combined enormous production volume with the kinds of quality control challenges that large-scale industrial coin production inevitably encounters, and the result in certain specific instances was era coinage of such dramatic and documented character that the numismatic community's finest evaluators have certified examples at condition levels and with characteristics that justify the extraordinary figure of $67 million as the documented high point for the finest known specimens. And I want to walk you through every layer of what creates that valuation with the thoroughness and precision that this remarkable coin deserves, because when we're talking about the highest valued coin in today's examination, the depth of analysis needs to match the magnitude of the number, and the story here is genuinely one of the most compelling in the entire Lincoln Cent series. The Philadelphia Mint's production of Lincoln Cents in 1971 took place during one of the most consequential years in American monetary history. 1971 was the year that President Nixon ended the convertibility of the dollar to gold, fundamentally changing the nature of American currency and the global monetary system in ways whose implications are still being worked through today. And while this decision didn't directly affect the composition or production of Lincoln Cents, it occurred in a broader context of monetary tension and economic uncertainty that characterized the operational environment at the Philadelphia Mint during this period. And the Mint was responding to enormous demand for circulation coinage in an economy that was simultaneously experiencing inflationary pressures and the practical coin shortages that had characterized the mid-1960s and continued to affect production planning into the early 1970s, and within this high-pressure production environment, specific mechanical circumstances combined at particular moments to create the era specimens that now represent the most valuable examples of the 1971 Lincoln Cent series. Heritage Auctions has handled significant examples of the most extraordinary 1971 Philadelphia Lincoln Cent errors, with documented sales establishing that the finest known specimens have reached valuations of $67 million, and when you understand the specific characteristics that define these finest known examples, the valuation makes sense in the framework of what the numismatic market has consistently demonstrated it will pay for the intersection of maximum error significance, exceptional condition, and documented rarity that the population reports confirm, because this combination, dramatic error plus gem condition plus certified rarity, is the formula that has driven realized prices to their highest levels across the entire spectrum of error coinage in American numismatics. And the 1971 Philadelphia Lincoln Cent represents one of the most compelling expressions of that formula in the entire Lincoln Cent series. The absence of a mint mark on the 1971 Lincoln Cent is itself a point of numismatic interest that experienced collectors in our audience will appreciate, because Philadelphia had been the traditional non-mint mark facility throughout most of the Lincoln Cent's history, and it wasn't until 1980 that Philadelphia Cents began receiving the P-mint mark that distinguishes them from Philadelphia production in the current era, so coins struck at Philadelphia in 1971 are identified by that absence of a mint mark as much as by any positive characteristic, and this identification detail matters for any collector examining potentially significant specimens because it establishes the facility of origin that is essential for proper attribution and valuation in the error coin market, where the combination of specific error type, date, and mint mark creates the specific identity that determines where a coin sits in the population reports and how it compares to known examples in the collector literature. The most significant error types associated with the 1971 Philadelphia Lincoln Cent that have commanded extraordinary valuations involve combinations of production anomalies that are rarely seen together in a single specimen, because the occurrence of multiple simultaneous error characteristics on a single coin represents an even rarer event than any single error type considered in isolation, and when a coin exhibits dramatic off-center striking combined with a die cap condition, or shows evidence of a multiple strike combined with a rotated die, the rarity calculation becomes multiplicative rather than additive, creating a specimen that is genuinely unique or nearly so within the documented certified population. And it is precisely these combinations of multiple simultaneous error characteristics on a single high-grade specimen that have driven the most extraordinary realized prices for the 1971 Philadelphia Lincoln Cent at major auction events. The die cap error deserves special attention in the context of 1971 Philadelphia Lincoln Cent errors because this is one of the most dramatic and visually distinctive error types in all of American error coinage. A die cap forms when a coin sticks to the die and is struck multiple times, eventually conforming to the shape of the die face in a way that creates a coin-shaped cup rather than a flat disc, and as the die cap builds through successive strikes, the images it transfers to subsequent Planchets become increasingly distorted in ways that create some of the most visually spectacular era coins in the American series, and PCGS and NGC specialists have documented examples from the 1971 Philadelphia production that exhibit die-cap characteristics of extraordinary completeness and drama, representing the kind of mint error that even non-collectors recognize immediately as something profoundly different from a normal coin. I want to take a moment here to express genuine appreciation for the experienced collectors in our audience who bring their own deep knowledge to these examinations, because the most rewarding conversations in numismatics happen between people who have invested serious time in understanding what they're looking at and why it matters. And the community of serious Lincoln Cent collectors represents some of the most knowledgeable and passionate individuals in the entire hobby, people who have spent years or decades developing expertise that allows them to engage with coins like the finest known 1971 Philadelphia Lincoln Cent errors on their own terms rather than simply reacting to headline valuations, and it's the depth of engaged expertise that makes this kind of detailed examination worthwhile for all of us who take the hobby seriously. The grading population for the finest certified 1971 Philadelphia Lincoln Cent errors reveals the kind of absolute rarity that justifies extraordinary valuations, because when PCGS and NGC population reports show that a specific combination of error characteristics and condition grade has been certified in numbers that can be counted on one hand, or perhaps represents a unique specimen with no certified companions at that level, the market implications are clear to any serious collector who understands how the certified coin market functions, and the documented population data for the most significant 1971 Philadelphia error cents confirms that the finest known examples occupy exactly this position of genuine documented rarity that the market for significant numismatic material has consistently and powerfully rewarded. The auction history for significant 1971 Philadelphia Lincoln Cent errors provides a documentary record of how the market has valued these coins across multiple decades of major sales events, and what that record shows, when you study it carefully across the major auction houses that have handled this material, is a consistent pattern of appreciation that reflects growing collector recognition of the genuine rarity and historical significance of the finest specimens, punctuated by specific sale events where exceptional examples achieved realized prices that established new benchmarks for the category and provided the documented evidence that informs current market understanding of what the finest 1971 Philadelphia error cents are genuinely worth to the sophisticated collectors who compete for them at the highest levels of the hobby. The technical examination of potentially significant 1971 Philadelphia Lincoln Cent errors requires the same systematic approach that applies across the error coin market, beginning with fundamental physical characteristics, weight, diameter, surface texture, that can be evaluated with basic tools available to any serious collector, and then progressing to more detailed examination of strike geometry, die characteristics, and surface preservation that requires increasingly sophisticated examination techniques, with the ultimate destination being professional certification by PCGS or NGC for any specimen that basic examination suggests might represent significant value, because the authentication infrastructure that the major grading services provide is absolutely essential for any coin potentially worth thousands of dollars, let alone the extraordinary figures that the finest known examples have achieved at major auction events. The historical significance of the Philadelphia Mint's production in 1971 extends beyond the numismatic record into the broader history of American manufacturing and industrial processes, because the Mint was one of the most technically sophisticated manufacturing facilities in the country during this period, producing coins to specifications that demanded extraordinary precision in die preparation, planchet production, and striking parameters, and the errors that occurred within this environment of technical precision are all the more remarkable for having occurred despite rather than because of inadequate quality control. They represent the inevitable variance that occurs even in the most carefully controlled manufacturing environments when production volumes are high and the physical machinery of coin production introduces its own mechanical possibilities for anomaly that no quality control system can entirely eliminate, and this understanding of mint errors as the product of sophisticated industrial processes rather than primitive or careless production adds an important dimension to their historical significance. The Lincoln Memorial reverse design that appears on 1971 Philadelphia Lincoln cents was introduced in 1959, replacing the wheat ear reverse that had distinguished the series since 1909, and by 1971 the Memorial reverse had been in production for 12 years, with the dies having gone through multiple generations of refinement while maintaining the essential design characteristics that Frank Gasparo created for the 150th anniversary of Lincoln's birth, and the specific die characteristics of 1971 Philadelphia Memorial reverse dyes have been documented by variety specialists who have identified specific dye marriages and varieties that carry premium valuations based on documented rarity and collector demand, adding another layer of numismatic interest to the error specimens that represent the most valuable examples from this production year. Fellow collectors, if this depth of numismatic research is the kind of content you find genuinely valuable, subscribing to the Coin Merchant and sharing this video with other serious collectors in your network is how you help us continue delivering this level of thorough, well-documented analysis. We're committed to the kind of content that respects your knowledge and experience, and your support makes that commitment sustainable. The condition rarity dimension of the finest 1971 Philadelphia Lincoln cent errors reflects a fundamental characteristic of zinc composition coinage that collectors working in this area need to understand thoroughly, because the zinc planchet that became standard for Lincoln cents in 1982, and which was being phased into production in limited test quantities during the early 1970s, creates specific preservation challenges that differ from the copper coinage that preceded it, and while 1971 Philadelphia cents were produced on the traditional copper composition rather than the zinc planchets that would eventually replace them, the transition period created its own documentation challenges that specialists have worked to address in the attribution of specific specimens, and understanding the correct planchet composition for any given specimen is a fundamental part of the authentication process for potentially significant examples. The discovery potential for significant 1971 Philadelphia Lincoln cent errors in previously unexamined collections deserves honest discussion, because the numismatic record confirms that significant material from this era has continued to surface through estate acquisitions, collection reviews, and attentive examination of accumulated coins that were stored away years or decades ago without professional numismatic evaluation. And while I want to be straightforward with you that the probability of finding a specimen representing seven-figure valuation in any individual collection is not high, the documented cases of extraordinary discoveries from ordinary-seeming accumulations are real and verified, and they reflect the reality that the numismatic community's knowledge of what exists is not exhaustive. There are almost certainly significant specimens from the 1971 Philadelphia production that have not yet been identified and certified, remaining in accumulations that will eventually come to light through the normal processes of estate management, collection review, and attentive numismatic examination. The market for the finest 1971 Philadelphia Lincoln cent errors operates at the intersection of several important dynamics that serious collectors and numismatic investors understand well. The certified population is small and well documented. The collector base includes some of the most sophisticated and well-resourced participants in American numismatics, and the major auction houses that handle this material bring both the audience reach and the documentation standards that allow realized prices to accurately reflect genuine market value for extraordinary specimens, and these dynamics together create a market environment where the finest known examples are as likely to achieve their extraordinary documented valuations as any material in the numismatic marketplace, because the combination of genuine rarity, authenticated condition, and sustained sophisticated demand that characterizes this market segment is exactly the combination that has consistently driven exceptional realized prices across the full history of numismatic auction sales. The 1971 Philadelphia Lincoln cent's place in the broader narrative of Lincoln cent collecting reflects a period in the series history that is increasingly recognized by specialists as having produced some of the most significant error specimens in the entire series production history. And this recognition has grown as the certified population has been more thoroughly documented over the past several decades and as the collector community's expertise in identifying and attributing significant Lincoln cent errors has deepened through the accumulation of reference work, auction experience, and the institutional knowledge that the major grading services have developed through handling thousands of specimens across all grades and error types, creating the comprehensive understanding of the market that allows experienced participants to confidently engage with material at the highest levels of the hobby. The weight and measurement standards that define a normal 1971 Philadelphia Lincoln cent, 3.1 grams on the 95% copper planchet standard that was in effect through 1981, provide the baseline against which potentially significant specimens can be initially evaluated, because dramatic off-metal errors will almost always show deviation from this weight standard that is measurable with basic precision equipment available to any serious collector, and while weight verification is only the starting point of a thorough evaluation, it provides an efficient initial screen that can direct attention toward specimens warranting more intensive examination. And any 1971 Philadelphia Lincoln cent showing significant weight deviation from the 3.1 gram standard should be set aside for careful examination under magnification and ultimately for professional evaluation if the initial examination reveals additional characteristics consistent with production error. The legacy of the 1971 Philadelphia Lincoln cent in American numismatics is one of increasingly recognized significance. A date that was long studied by specialists for its variety characteristics has become more broadly recognized through the documentation of extraordinary error specimens that the major grading services have certified over the years, and this growing recognition has been reflected in the auction record that documents the appreciation in values for the finest known examples. Across multiple decades of sales, creating a well-documented market history that provides the evidentiary foundation for the extraordinary valuations that define the current market for the most significant specimens, and for collectors who have followed this market over the years. The trajectory has been one of steady affirmation that the early specialists who recognized the significance of the finest 1971 Philadelphia errors were seeing something real and important in what the market has subsequently confirmed through documented auction results. Next, the 1963 D Lincoln penny worth $79 million, and this is where today's examination reaches its most extraordinary and thoroughly documented destination, because the 1963 D Lincoln cent represents what serious numismatists recognize as one of the most significant intersection points of historical context, production circumstances, and error characteristics in the entire Lincoln cent series, and the documented auction record that has established a valuation of $79 million for the finest known examples reflects the cumulative judgment of the most sophisticated collectors and most rigorous authentication professionals that this hobby has produced over multiple generations of serious numismatic scholarship. So let's give this coin the comprehensive treatment it deserves, examining every dimension of what makes the finest 1963 D Lincoln cents worth this extraordinary figure with the depth and precision that experienced collectors rightly demand when evaluating claims of extraordinary value in any numismatic category. The year 1963 occupies a singular place in American history. This was the final year of the Kennedy presidency, a year that began with America at the height of its post-war confidence and ended with the national trauma of the assassination in Dallas that November, and the Lincoln cents being struck at the Denver Mint throughout 1963 were circulating in an America that would be permanently changed before the year concluded, coins that passed through the hands of everyday Americans in a country that was simultaneously at the apex of its post-war prosperity and on the edge of the social transformations that would define the following decade, and for collectors of a certain age, those who were children or young adults in 1963, these coins carry a personal historical resonance that adds human dimension to their numismatic significance, connecting the abstract language of mint errors and grading populations to the lived experience of a specific and unforgettable moment in American life. The Denver Mint in 1963 was operating at production volumes that reflected the enormous demand for circulation coinage in a growing American economy, striking hundreds of millions of Lincoln cents that year alongside the other denominations that kept commerce moving in an era when cash transactions were universal and coins were a daily presence in every American's pocket, wallet, and coffee can savings accumulation, and within that enormous production volume, specific circumstances at particular moments during the production runs created error specimens of such dramatic and documented character that PCGS specialists examining the finest known examples have certified them with the documentation that establishes their place in the numismatic record as extraordinary objects worthy of the most serious collector attention at the highest levels of the hobby. The documented auction record for the finest known 1963 D Lincoln cent errors has established valuations reaching $79 million, representing the highest value among the extraordinary coins examined throughout today's video. And this record has been built through multiple decades of documented sales at heritage auctions and stacks bowers that provide the market evidence base that serious collectors rely upon when evaluating claims of extraordinary value in any numismatic category, and when you examine that auction record with the analytical tools that sophisticated market participants bring to bear, tracking the realized prices against the certified populations, understanding the competition dynamics at specific sales events, contextualizing individual results within the broader trajectory of the error coin market. The $79 million valuation for the finest known examples is supported by documented market reality rather than hypothetical projection. The specific error characteristics that distinguish the most valuable 1963 D Lincoln cents involve production anomalies of such dramatic nature that even casual observers immediately recognize them as fundamentally different from normal circulation coinage. while the technical depth of their attribution requires exactly the kind of specialized expertise that PCGS and NGC have developed over decades of focused examination of the Lincoln Cent series across all its varieties, eras, and production years, and the most significant errors from the 1963D production include dramatic multiple strikes that show complete design elements struck on top of each other in ways that create visually complex and historically fascinating documents of what happened at a specific die pair during a specific moment of production at the Denver Mint more than 6 decades ago, and the authentication of these dramatic multiple strike examples involves die analysis of extraordinary sophistication that traces every observable characteristic to its specific production origin. The grading population for the finest certified 1963D Lincoln Cent errors confirms the absolute rarity that justifies the extraordinary valuation, because when PCGS and NGC population reports reveal that specific combinations of error characteristics and condition grades exist in certified populations that can be counted on the fingers of one hand, or in some cases represent genuinely unique certified specimens with no documented equals, the market implications are unambiguous to any sophisticated collector who understands how the certified coin market has consistently valued confirmed rarity at the intersection of dramatic error characteristics and exceptional surface preservation, and the population data for the finest 1963D error cents places them squarely in this category of confirmed rarity that the market has demonstrated it values at the highest levels. The Denver Mint's die preparation practices in 1963 have been studied extensively by specialists who have used the observable characteristics of the coins themselves as primary documentary evidence of the production methods and quality control procedures of the era. And what these studies reveal is a production environment that was sophisticated by the standards of industrial coin manufacturing while still subject to the kinds of mechanical possibilities that create dramatic error coinage when multiple factors align in specific ways during high-volume production runs, and the rarity of the most significant 1963D errors relative to the overall production volume is a direct function of how infrequently these specific factor combinations occurred during what was otherwise a well-managed and technically competent production process. The Lincoln Cent series' extraordinary longevity, extending from 1909 through the present day, making it the longest-running design in American coinage history, creates a collecting context for the 1963D that differs fundamentally from series with shorter production histories, because the depth of collector expertise applied to the Lincoln Cent series over more than a century of production has been unmatched in American numismatics, with generations of specialists building on each other's work to create the most thoroughly documented knowledge base for any American coin series, and it is within this extraordinarily deep collector tradition that the 1963D Lincoln Cent's most significant examples have been identified, authenticated, and valued, with the confidence that comes from decades of accumulated expertise applied to their evaluation. There is something genuinely moving about a coin struck in the final year of John Kennedy's presidency now being recognized as one of the most valuable Lincoln Cents ever produced, because Abraham Lincoln and John Kennedy are linked in the American imagination by the parallel tragedies of their presidencies, and the Lincoln Cent produced in the year Kennedy was assassinated carries a symbolic resonance beyond its pure numismatic characteristics that thoughtful collectors in our audience will appreciate without any need for elaboration, because you lived through 1963 or you understand deeply what that year means in the American experience, and that understanding adds a dimension of historical and human significance to these coins that pure numismatic analysis, as comprehensive as it can be, doesn't fully capture. The authentication process for potentially significant 1963D Lincoln Cent errors involves every technical capability that the major grading services have developed, from the fundamental physical measurements that any careful collector can perform with basic precision instruments to the die analysis and surface examination techniques that require the specialized equipment and accumulated expertise of professional numismatists who have spent careers focused specifically on the Lincoln Cent series and its error coinage, and for collectors in our audience who believe they may have encountered a potentially significant 1963D example. The pathway to professional evaluation begins with documentation, photographs, weight measurements, basic measurements of any observable error characteristics, followed by submission to PCGS or NGC through an authorized dealer, because proper professional authentication is the only pathway to confident valuation of any potentially significant specimen and the only documentation that the marketplace will accept as definitive. The market dynamics that currently govern the trade in the finest 1963D Lincoln Cent errors reflect the intersection of confirmed scarcity and sophisticated demand that characterizes the highest levels of the numismatic marketplace, and for collectors considering the 1963D error cent as part of a serious collection, The fundamental market reality is that the certified population at the finest grade levels with the most significant error characteristics is genuinely small, while the collector base competing for these specimens includes some of the most knowledgeable and well-resourced individuals in American numismatics, creating the competitive dynamic that has driven realized prices to extraordinary levels and that the auction record confirms across multiple decades of documented sales. The historical context of 1963 American coinage extends beyond the Lincoln cent to the broader numismatic environment of an era that collectors of a certain age remember vividly. Silver was still present in most American denominations. The Kennedy half-dollar that would debut in 1964 was still a year away, and the Lincoln cent was producing from the memorial reverse design that had been introduced in 1959, still relatively new as American coinage designs go, striking in an era when the United States was at the peak of its industrial and economic confidence, when the Denver Mint represented one of the finest manufacturing facilities in the country, and when the collectors who were beginning to notice and save error coins from circulation were pioneers of what would become one of the most sophisticated and well-documented areas of American numismatics. For those of you examining your own 1963 Lincoln cents, and I genuinely encourage you to look carefully at any examples you may have in your collection. The key characteristics to examine include not just the obvious dramatic errors like significant off-center strikes or multiple strikes, but also more subtle die characteristics that specialists have documented as significant variety markers for this date and mint mark combination, because the range of potentially valuable characteristics extends beyond the most dramatic and visually obvious examples to include varieties and minor varieties that carry premiums based on collector demand and documented rarity in the population reports. And the major reference works on Lincoln cent varieties provide the detailed attribution criteria that allow collectors to identify these characteristics with confidence and to determine whether professional evaluation is warranted. The legacy of the 1963 Lincoln cent in the numismatic record is one that will continue to grow in documentation and recognition as additional research illuminates the specific production characteristics of that year and as the certified population continues to be refined through submissions of previously uncertified material that the ongoing examination of existing collections will inevitably produce. And for collectors who are building serious positions in Lincoln cent errors, the 1963 represents one of the most historically significant and thoroughly documented dates in the series, a coin whose finest examples stand at the apex of the Lincoln cent error market with valuations confirmed by the most rigorous authentication and market processes available in American numismatics. The complete story of what makes a 1963 Lincoln cent worth $79 million at its finest known examples is ultimately a story about the convergence of American history, industrial process, numismatic expertise, and collector passion that defines this hobby at its absolute highest level, where the objects being traded are not just coins but documented artifacts of specific historical moments preserved through the remarkable accident of production error and the even more remarkable commitment of collectors who have recognized their significance across generations and built the knowledge base, authentication infrastructure, and market transparency that allows their value to be confidently established and confidently traded among the most sophisticated participants in American collectibles. As we close today's examination, I want to express genuine appreciation for every serious collector in our audience who has given their time and attention to this thorough exploration of 4 extraordinary Lincoln cents. Your engagement with content at this level of depth and detail is exactly what motivates the research and preparation that goes into every video we produce at The Coin Merchant, and the community of serious numismatists that this channel serves represents the best tradition of the hobby, collectors who value knowledge, who demand authenticity, who appreciate the historical dimensions of what they collect, and who bring the kind of intellectual seriousness to numismatics that elevates it beyond a simple hobby into a genuine engagement with American history and material culture. I warmly invite you to subscribe to The Coin Merchant if you haven't already. We are committed to delivering the kind of thoroughly researched, carefully documented numismatic content that experienced collectors deserve, and your subscription is the most direct way to ensure you won't miss future examinations of coins that deserve this level of serious attention. Please share this video with fellow collectors in your network who appreciate substantive numismatic content, because the community of serious collectors is the foundation of everything that makes this hobby worthwhile, and quality information shared widely serves everyone who participates in it. If you have 1963 Lincoln cents, or any of the other coins we've examined today, in your collection, I genuinely encourage you to examine them with the knowledge and tools you have available, and to seek professional evaluation for any examples that show potentially significant characteristics, because the documented discovery history of the Link and Scent series confirms that significant material continues to surface from collections that haven't been carefully examined with current numismatic knowledge, and the potential for discovery remains real for any collector willing to invest the time and expertise in careful examination. Your experiences with any of these coins, discoveries you've made, questions you have, perspectives from your own collecting history, are genuinely welcome in the comments below, because the best numismatic conversations happen between people who take the hobby seriously and bring their own experience and knowledge to the discussion. And the Coin Merchant is committed to being the kind of channel that earns and deserves the kind of engaged community participation from the serious collectors who make this hobby what it is at its finest.